Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman joins me in studio today to give an update on current municipal issues. Welcome back to BCN, Mayor.
I'm happy to be here, Hal.
Now, since the last time we chatted, the city received about $11 million of provincial funding for a 42-unit supportive housing facility. How much of an impact will that have in our community?
Well, that was good news to receive those funds from the provincial government. We've been asking for those funds for 5 years. We received a preliminary approval a year prior, and it's good to have the review and the money finally flowing. So it'll be about a year before we can build that facility. We heard from our PAC team in a presentation to council. They're the Alberta Health Unit that works with our Lethbridge City Police, that their caseload is 171 individuals.
Wow.
So we could actually use about 3 more of those 42-unit housing facilities to get people the supports they need when they have severe mental health issues and probably will have great difficulty coping in life. So they need the supported housing that's been provided to us.
How about locations? Has that been really discussed with the province at all?
That is a provincial decision. We certainly are working with the province on possible locations, and of course we recognize that those will be controversial, and certainly we're working with them and partners as to who might actually be operating it. But those will be provincial decisions.
Now, let's talk about the conversion therapy ban, or the bylaw to potentially ban conversion therapy in our city. It's been banned in Edmonton, St. Albert, Calgary's looking at doing the same thing, Vancouver. But there's some people saying, well, if somebody wants help and they're questioning their own sexuality, why not just have that available to somebody as opposed to being coerced or forced into doing something that they don't want to, like changing their sexual identity?
Yeah. So the concern has been the way that has been done and conducted in the past, the practices that were employed, and certainly what we've done is said that we wouldn't be issuing business licenses. We've asked for our administration to bring back a proposal, so we wouldn't be issuing business licenses for those practices. So people who access counseling can get counseling, but it would certainly not be as a business in the city of Lethbridge. We have to be careful as a city too that we're only involved in issues that are within our mandate. So the other piece of the bylaw or the resolution that was passed was to write to the provincial government, because it is in their jurisdiction, making sure that they pass legislation, or urging them to pass legislation which would limit the undesirable practices that have been associated with conversion therapy.
Yeah, I mean, there was chemical castration in the past, shock therapy. I mean, that's no longer used. At least you'd hope it's no longer used. Have you chatted with some of the faith-based groups in town and got their reaction regarding this potential ban?
We haven't had that discussion. That would be something our administration will do as we go forward to develop a bylaw. But certainly we want to work with faith-based groups in certainly other areas and supportive areas, and things like housing and how do we work together on those issues. So in the same way, we would have discussions with them.
Now let's talk about the city deciding to extend the agreement to fund the school buses here. With the local school boards being shifted over to the private sector, is everyone really okay with that decision?
Well, I think the decision we made to extend it by a year was to allow school boards to look at all alternatives, including running the school bus system themselves. So it could be turned over to the private sector, or it could be the school bus system being run by the school board. So in any event, we would be getting out of yellow school bus transportation. We're the only municipality in the province that currently provides that, and it's moving the responsibility back to the school boards where it belongs.
Why? Is it a money issue? Is that the bottom line?
It's basically a jurisdictional issue, and we don't want to be involved in areas where we don't need to have responsibility.
Now, council decided to put off the census this year. You believe it may be a better way to spend some money? Is that the big reason behind it?
There's a cost to doing the census, and because the provincial government has changed their funding formulas, there's no point in doing the census this year. When we're growing as a city on a regular basis, we were doing annual census because previously we would be funded on a per capita basis when grant funding was provided every year for things like MSI. So
Explain to
now
our viewers what that is, MSI.
that's Municipal Sustainability Initiative. That's the capital funding from the province. Now they're saying they're going to be using the federal census. And of course, we have concerns about that as well, because we don't want them using the 2016 census for funding projects. We want to make sure that they're using current populations. So we'll talk to the province about what that funding formula will be, and we want to make sure that cities like Lethbridge aren't penalized when we're growing at about 2% a year in population. And secondly, the census is taken during the month of June, and we want to make sure that the students who are in the city for 8 months of the year form part of our population base.
Now, with a big city of Lethbridge, we're over 100,000, speaking of census, comes big city problems as well. We've talked about the supervised consumption site, we've talked about some of the drug and crime issues in our city, but what's with these bike chop shops that are popping up everywhere?
Well,
What is going on there? I've heard of car chop shops, but now we have bike chop shops.
Certainly, bicycle theft, one of the ways to cover your tracks, if you like, is to basically paint the bikes and splice different bikes together and that type of thing so they're unrecognizable. So we're going to have our police chief report to the police commission fairly soon about ways to mitigate bike theft. So he'll be responding to a request from a young resident who said his bike has been stolen 4 different times. And we'll be having proposed solutions on bike tracking coming from the police chief. So I want to let the chief come forward with those proposals, but we're expecting them possibly as soon as the March Police Commission meeting.
Now, speaking of the police chief, Scott Woods, interim police chief, how's the search coming for a permanent police chief?
I would love to know the answer to that, but I'm not on the
haven't heard
search committee.
No?
We have a search committee on the police commission, and that's their responsibility. Right now, I'm not part of that.
When are they getting back to you?
They will report to the whole commission.
Yeah.
I think the thing that people need to understand is we have representatives on the police commission from Lethbridge City Council, but we cannot direct the police commission. And we also, in my opinion, shouldn't be involved in the search for a police chief, because that could be seen as political interference. We don't try to direct in any way Lethbridge Police Services or the police chief.
Lethbridge is now the first municipality in Alberta to offer green burials. Explain to our viewers exactly what that looks like.
Well, that's a new program. Basically, you're not having to be buried in a casket. That there are processes. You're basically buried in a burlap bag, which erodes, and of course
This sounds pretty cheap.
Yeah,
It's like your family cheaped out on you.
The corpse. Well, people are choosing to do those types of things, and it's the section of the graveyard, if you like, or the cemetery that's being set aside, is dedicated to green burials and is being maintained by city staff. So it's a way that you can choose to have your remains give back in another way. So.
Okay, sure, why not? I remember when my father passed away, the day after, all of a sudden I received a couple of phone calls from some of the funeral homes. They said, you know, we want to sell you a wonderful deal. I'm like, that's great. Well, we've got this casket for $6,500. I said, my father wants to be cremated. Well, that's fine. We can burn that too. Yeah. What? You want to burn the casket, $6,500? Like, you know, my father would be rolling over in his grave. That's burning money, right? Mm-hmm. Now, earlier this month, there was a business community roundtable discussion regarding the Lethbridge Airport. What kind of suggestions or plans came out of that meeting?
Well, what happened was we engaged an organization by the name of Modalis, who have worked with airports around the world to assess our airport. So in essence, similar to an administrative review, they looked at the strengths and weaknesses of the airport, and then they developed a plan for development of the Lethbridge Airport, which they reported to the community. So we'll be building on that plan. These are people with extensive experience in airport development. So it's not just about passenger flights, which is important, but also about airport development as an economic development driver. So how do you develop the lands around the airport, and how do you improve the customer experience at the airport?
What do you see some of the weaknesses are right now for the Lethbridge Airport?
Well, there is basically a small staff. I think the total number of employees is about 10.
Wow.
And of course, how do you maintain security? How do you ensure that you have the right expertise? We want to continue to provide a good level of service to the airlines. So we never want to be the reasons why flights are canceled. To this point, there have been some cancellations and some concerns from passengers about having to wait in Calgary, about late night flight cancellations. All of those cancellations were by the airlines. None of it was because we weren't ready at Lethbridge to receive a plane. And we need to make sure that's always the case, that runways are always plowed. People take for granted that the runways will be plowed when the early morning flights take off, and that means people have to be getting out of bed at 3 o'clock or in the morning to be plowing at 4 o'clock to make sure that the runways are in shape to accommodate landing and taking off. So we need to make sure that we have all the services in place with a very limited staff and make sure that we have backups, that we never have interruptions.
Now, speaking of plowing, for people who are new to our city, Mayor, can you explain why a lot of the side streets are not plowed in our city during the winter months? You get 4 feet of snow,
sure,
or 5 feet with the snow drifts?
The reason why is because people don't want to pay higher taxes. It would cost money to make sure that all the streets
Are people
were plowed.
willing to fork in a few extra bucks?
No, they're not. No, that's why we're doing administrative reviews of our services. We're looking for areas to save money and minimize any future tax savings. So we're putting a lot of effort into those administrative reviews, and City Council is determined to follow up on the recommendations. So, yeah.
Lethbridge Construction Association says local construction is forecast to stay in a lull over the next few years, and they're hoping that City Council will advocate for more provincial funding for education and apprenticeships. How's that coming?
Well, we are working on trying to, we're trying to work with our local investors and saying, let's look at the provincial economy for the next couple of years. It doesn't look rosy. If we're going to have a self-sustaining economy, we're going to have to do it ourselves. Don't count on the provincial government to be handing us any big increases in grants, and we're going to have to make sure we're funding projects, develop private sources of funding, and we'll have to go forward from there. We've had some wonderful partnerships. We'll pursue everything we can provincially and federally, and we see provincially the funds are drying up. We're going to need to be able to access federal funds to make sure Lethbridge gets its fair share, and we can continue to move forward with projects. You're going to see Lethbridge City Council delaying capital projects simply because the funds aren't available from the provincial government in most cases. And we're basically trying to be in tune with the city of Lethbridge, and the taxpayers of Lethbridge cannot be funding a lot of capital projects. There's no way to reduce taxes if we're going forward and bearing the burden of major capital projects. So.
You know, on the other hand, Mayor, a survey commissioned by Economic Development Lethbridge and the Chamber of Commerce asked for feedback from 143 local business owners and their economic prospects. 76% said it was very much a positive outlook, and 80% said they would either maintain or expand their workforce for the next year. So that must be positive news, right?
That's really good news, and you know, we're going to do what we can to stimulate the economy from the city point of view, but it can't. All those funds can't be coming from the city. So we'll be working with private partners. We'll be looking for creative financing models, and we want projects to move forward. So we've got a housing strategy. Who can we partner with to build additional housing in the city for the people that need it?
With the coronavirus spreading around the world, I mean, in China right now, 150 million Chinese in lockdown, you know, more than 1,000 deaths so far. You know, over 70 or 80,000 people affected right now, a lot of them in China. But if the coronavirus were to make its way to Lethbridge, has the city actually sat down with the Alberta Health Services to put a plan in place, how to protect us here?
That's not really our responsibility, and we would rely exclusively on Alberta Health Services and health policy to deal with an issue like that. To date, I believe there has been no incidents of the coronavirus in Alberta, which is positive, and we would always take our lead from Alberta Health Services and the medical officer of health locally on any issue like that. That is not a political issue. What I would suggest is that we do our best to make sure that we are healthy ourselves. And these are unrelated issues, I will admit. But we always struggle with some basic issues like influenza vaccinations. People don't get those and could. There are people that don't have their children vaccinated for things like measles. We have avoidable outbreaks of illnesses, and we have to make sure that people follow the advice that's given to them by Alberta Health Services and our medical officer of health. So I don't view health as a democracy or a democratic issue. I think we have to think of the greater good of our whole community. The reason why people should get an influenza inoculation, you and I might be healthy, we might survive influenza ourselves, but there are people in our community whose health is compromised. The older people in our community, the very young people, are susceptible, and if fewer of us are actually exposed to the flu, then the chances of them getting exposed to the flu are that much reduced. So when it comes to coronavirus or influenza or any other thing, follow the advice of the medical officer of health.
Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman, thanks again for joining us in studio today.
Thank you, Hal. It's always a pleasure to be here.